welcome everyone to our sold-out event at the Centre for Computing History. I know a few faces that have been to events here before, and if you haven't been to one before, hopefully you're going to have a great time. We usually do something a little bit different rather than just a straight Q&A. We'll throw some interesting little things in there too. So if you were here last night, I know a couple of you were. There's one. You will have seen John's partner in crime last night, his lovely wife Brenda, do her talk with Violet Berlin. So this is night 2 of our husband and wife weekend, and it is, of course. I don't see too many children here, but the event page did warn you about bringing children because we may hear the word bitch later on. Maybe even the word Daikatana, but we'll try and... The D word, we'll maybe try and avoid that one. So, John, you must be, I'm guessing now, sick to the back teeth of doing events like this and answering questions and coming meeting fans. It must be a real bind for you. Do you enjoy getting out and doing these events?
Yeah, I actually do a lot of them, all over Europe as well. So I go to, Poland, Croatia. I almost never go back to the US now. I've been back twice for 1 day each time. That's about it. The rest of the time I've spent just going all over Europe, mostly in England, but Germany, like everywhere.
And you're reasonably local now, being a resident of Ireland, of course.
Yeah, we live in Galway, so we're still on the West Coast, just different continent, a different part of the country or world, and we just love it, you know.
Good. So, of course, we know a lot of your history, your career in games, etc. Obviously, there's the other D word, Doom. We'll get to speak about that a bit later. Co-founder of id Software, of course, and Doom, Quake, Hexen, Heretic, all of those games, the names that we know. So, round 1 we're going to play is the picture quiz from the quiz that you picked up on the way in. We'll go through those games, identify them, talk about those a little. Round 2, the audience won't be entering because you can just Google the answers. Although I did see some people on Google Images, didn't I? So we've got some cheats in already. And then round 3, we're going to, round 2 that you didn't enter is going to be a Jeopardy round. I'll read out a review of one of John's games. He'll have to guess which game it is. And then obviously we'll talk about that game. And then round 3, back to audience participation. Where you had to pick John Romero's top 3 John Romero games. So, before we get into your career and the games too much, I just wanted to talk a little about you. Some little snippets I picked up. I did read this a couple of weeks ago. It's a great book. And in there you talk about the Apple II in particular in those early days. And as soon as it arrived in the house, you opened it, you unpacked it, you set it up. Even before your dad got home. So, yeah. How did that purchase come about? Was it for your dad? Was it for you?
It was for me. Yeah, I really needed to have a computer at home because I was obsessed with programming. And back then, not that many people had computers at home. I didn't have any friends I didn't even know any friends that. I knew one person that knew how to program. And I found out about computers in 1979 because my friend said, hey, I found a place where we can play games for free. And if you're a little kid who doesn't have much money and you're having to spend 25 cents every minute or so in the arcade, free games is awesome. So so I followed him on my bike, and he took us to the college in town. And we drove straight to the computer building and went in where it was probably about 40 degrees cooler inside. And it was the summertime, so there weren't that many students there. There was probably maybe 1 or 2 in the computer room. And this computer room had about 20 just terminals, black and white terminals, HP terminals connected to this giant mainframe in the next room. And I didn't know what any of it was. I just went there, and we got on one of the machines, and he had the login for a friend that lived down the street from him. So he logged in, and he started showing me the games, and they're just these text games, just like Poison Cookie and Hunt the Wumpus and Nim, and just really 70s stuff. And it was interesting because it wasn't what I was used to, which was arcade games and stuff. And I didn't have to hurry. I could just sit there and kind of play around with it. And so we just kept coming every day, and nobody said anything. Like 11-year-old kids running around in the computer science building, and no one said a thing, which is amazing. And I guess they thought we knew what we were doing, because we like get on the computer and we're just typing and stuff. So it's like, well, that's good. But I found out that you could actually make the stuff that I was using, that I was playing, and that everybody, the other couple people that were in that room, they were coding, they were learning how to program. So I just kind of went over and watched what they were doing and just asked them, like, what does that do? What does that word do? And they would tell me, and I'm like, okay, write that down, and then go back to the other terminal and start using it. And then basically I just started learning BASIC by asking the college students what they were typing and what it did, and just started to make my first little adventure game. I didn't have the idea for the adventure game until I saw Adventure, which actually happened on Saturday mornings at 7 a.m. And like everybody went there just to watch this one person who had Adventure in his account to play it, and it was really like the best game at the time, Colossal Cave Adventure. And I was like, I want to make something like that. So my first game was basically trying to make Adventure, and that's without learning what variables were or anything like that. But that's how I started. So from 79 until about 82, I would go to the college, during the summer times. I would go to computer stores and try to get on the computer, because basically everything ran BASIC at the time. So I could get on the computers and type the same language, and it worked. So the Apple II computers were the ones that were in most of the stores where I was at. And we, probably in 81, the college opened up a new room that was just full of Apple IIs, and that was like full access now. And they weren't going to kick me out either, so I got lots of time on those Apple IIs. And I kept telling my dad when I came home about all the things I was learning, so he thought, I need to get a computer at home. And it was really expensive. It was like over $10,000 to get. He bought everything. He bought the printer, he bought every, cards that ran CPM, like all kinds of stuff that I didn't even need. But he bought everything that he could, and I was finished going outside having like a normal kid, childhood over. So it was basically programming as much as possible from then on.
Another computer you were very fond of, we were talking last night, there's one over there, the BBC Micro.
Yep.
You loved how it kind of mixed and gave you the ability to do BASIC
and assembly.
And assembly, and of course, being in the UK as we are, and particularly Cambridge, it's a popular machine in these parts. You want to talk about your fascination with the BBC Micro a bit?
Yeah, so so in 82 is when we got our Apple II at home, and that was probably early 82. So all of 1982 was making a ton of BASIC games. And then my parents decided that they're going to move to England on January 1st of 83. So the computer was going to be on a ship for 6 months. 6 months. And I asked my parents for two things for Christmas of 82, which was a book called Assembly Lines by Roger Wagner, which was how to program in 6502 assembly language, and then another book called Apple Graphics Arcade Game Design by Jeffrey Stanton. So I just wanted those two books. They both were in assembly language, and I needed to learn it because I'd had enough of BASIC. I couldn't. Everything was slow. So finally, I got those books at Christmas time, and I had a week to learn assembly. I actually learned it much faster, just within a couple pages. I was like, why couldn't I learn this earlier? And I started coding it, and then it was like, goodbye computer. So I kept the books, and when we came to England, we basically went to Alconbury, so it's not even that far from here. No. And the first place that we lived was in Swavesey, just down the street from Alconbury. And then we moved to Needingworth about 6 months after that. And while I was at home, I basically was writing my first assembly language games on paper, and the school at RAF Alconbury, they had Apple IIs there. So during lunch, I would take the stuff I wrote on paper and type it in at lunchtime and see if it ran. And that's how I basically learned until the computer finally showed up halfway. We'd already moved out of Swavesey to Needingworth. Then the computer arrived, and back to not going out again.
Right. If you don't mind me saying, you didn't have probably the easiest childhood by your own admission. Was games and programming and computers, was that kind of an escape from real life in any way? Were you you're sinking yourself into that world to
No, I
get
just
away
thought
from
it
anything,
was
or
amazing.
just
I
cool?
just loved it. Yeah,
Right.
it was. I could have had no issues, and I still would have dove straight into it.
Right.
Programming was just like the coolest thing ever. So that's why, because programming was amazing.
Yeah.
Making games, I loved playing games. I could make games and I was trying to get better as I was doing it. So I had to do it as much as possible to get really, really good.
Without getting too much into the whole violent video games debate and what have you, you were at that time also doing doodles, like you were saying. We looked at some of your notebooks, but a lot of those pictures featured blood, death, knives, things like that. Was that you? Was that just something that was cool? I mean, how much of John Romero is there in those doodles and those games that followed?
I did that for years. I have like a book of comics that I drew back then, from the 70s to like 80s, maybe even to like 1990, with a character named Melvin who just got obliterated by his parents. Amazingly, his dad. So it was everything. It was sometimes like, how could I just kill him in a different way? And so violence was always a thing that I did in all of the stuff that I drew usually.
Hopefully restricted to paper.
Yeah, just on paper, and then I could do it in a game. But it was just I listened to heavy metal. I basically listened to metal for the first time here in England. I had never heard it back in California. But when I came to RAF Alconbury, the guys that were going to school with me at the bus stop, they had Black Sabbath and Judas Priest and like everything, and so they would let me have the records, and then I could tape them, and then I got to hear everything, and that was it.
We were listening to AC/DC yesterday.
Yeah.
Who you recognised.
Yeah. I didn't know the name of the song. It was like, this is AC/DC. Oh yeah.
Yeah. There's a quote in this book attributed to you that says, "Anything that's going to stop us mowing shit down, get it out of there." So is that a genuine quote? And is that the way you really felt? You just wanted to blow shit up?
Yeah, well, that was probably when we were making Wolfenstein, and we do a lot of, when we were making games, we were experimenting with a lot of stuff, especially with Wolfenstein, because it was the first time that we were doing a first-person shooter and trying to make the best one that we could, because it was like our third one. I think it was our third one. We did Hover Tank, and we did Catacomb 3D, and then we did Wolfenstein, and we wanted it to be good. But we were trying to recreate the classic Castle Wolfenstein game, which was a stealth game. It was actually the first stealth game. But we wanted to do an action take on this cool stealth game. So we were putting in all these things into Wolfenstein, Wolfenstein 3D. From Castle Wolfenstein, we're putting all these things in there that were stealth elements. And at some point, I'm noticing while we're playing, I'm stopping, and I'm going, and I'm stopping. I'm like, that's not what this game is. Like, we have to identify what this game is and really make it flow. Like, figure out what the core is and support the core of the game. And so we basically just said, take it all out. I mean, we actually programmed dragging dead bodies around and searching and doing all the stuff that you did in the original Wolfenstein. And it was like, this is slowing us down. This game is about mowing Nazis down. That's all you should be doing. There should be nothing stopping me but the doors. Yeah. And even dogs. I mean, like, everything was in there. So it was, that's how we had to identify what it was. It would have been a totally different thing if we had left that stuff in there. It would have been like, we're just kind of throwing everything in this game instead of just streamlining the design. And so that was important to make Wolfenstein 3D be what it was really an homage to the original Castle Wolfenstein. In fact, Silas Warner, who wrote the original one, got to see it. Right after we had made it, we went to an Apple convention in Kansas City just 2 months after we made the game, and he was there as a speaker. Right. So we got to hear him talk and everything, and then we got to show him the game, and everyone in the Apple II community just loved it. We also had the very first color laptop at the time in 1992. Wow. So we got this color laptop, we got Wolfenstein on it, we showed it to everybody. Everyone loved it because they all loved Wolfenstein, You know, they hated PCs, but this was like their game on a PC, so it was cool.
So back then, some of these early pictures, you can see yourself there. You may recognise yourself. I don't know.
We actually sell that shirt.
That T-shirt, do you? There are T-shirts for sale outside as well. I should have said. So back then, what were you doing? Were you pursuing recognition for your games? Were you looking to build a stable life for your family, a good home, or were you just doing?
No, we're just making games. That was it. Yeah, we only cared about making games. So, John, me, Adrian, and Tom are the 4 guys that originally founded the company, and then Kevin and Jay, we hired them like a year, probably about 15 months after we started the company. So it was really the 4 of us that had started in Louisiana. We went up to Wisconsin. We moved down to Texas, and then we hired Kevin and Jay, and we'd known those guys for years. I'd known Jay since 1986, and so we were just pursuing making better games, and we wanted to do it in a nice location. We moved up to Wisconsin accidentally.
You a fan of cheese?
Well, Tom is fond of cheese, and he grew up in Wisconsin,
right.
And he went to Madison. And when I just wanted to get out of Shreveport because it was such a depressed economy and everything, it was really hot, or mostly humid. And he said, "Oh, it's really great up here." So we went in August, and it was really great in August. And then we moved up there, and then it was insane for about 5 months, solid ice. And then we immediately moved down to Texas. We weren't going to go back to Louisiana, so we went to Texas because Adrian, who grew up in Shreveport, the big city is Dallas, from anywhere around there. So we're like, that's fine, it's hot there, and Adrian wants to go, I want to go, Tom doesn't want to go, and John doesn't care. So so we chose to go down to Dallas, and we had Scott Miller and George Broussard, who ran Apogee. They basically drove us around all over the place so we could look at apartments, and that was just Tom and I. In fact, it was Tom and I who went up to Wisconsin to find the place to move, and then it was like, Tom, really? It's freezing.
Right, yeah.
And then Tom and I came back down, and it's like, okay, it's nice and hot, and there's a lake here and everything. So
there's great anecdotes in the book about you making excursions out for food, knee-high in snow and what have you, snow and ice, making your way out before you got back into coding again. So
it was crazy.
I'm a big fan of, the early days of the industry, listening to people like Steve Wozniak, people like yourself, obviously. Before there really was an industry as you'd recognise it. So can you talk to us about how you would distribute your games back then, the whole soft disk era, and how you got your games into the hands of people who wanted to play them?
Yeah, before soft disk, I was making dozens of games, and I was when I could sell a game, it was at that time to magazines where people would type them in. Does everybody know about typing in games from magazines? It's horrible. But people did it for a long time. And the magazines that I actually published them in, they actually had checksums on the line. So if you messed up, you could find out right then. But I published a bunch of my games in magazines, and then some of them on discs that went into stores, and eventually kind of started getting out from there, getting into retail. And then I got my first industry job in '87 at Origin, which was before soft disk. And so I was porting games. I was starting to port games, and then it was basically my best job ever. It was a company I had always wanted to work at, and I got to go there. I got hired there. It was a pretty intense interview process. There were like 9 programmers interviewing me at their office in New Hampshire, and they hired me, and I got to be at like this place that I've loved for 7 years at the time, and I left after like 8 months. And it was because the guy that brought me in, he wanted to go and found a company. He wanted me to found the company with him. So I was like, yeah, let's do that. And I had a wife and I had a kid, and I think at that time, it was one first kid. And so I was like, yeah, let's do that. That'd be really cool. So I left and started my second game company. The first one was basically when I got a computer at home. I started my first game company and published about 17 games through that company. Then after Origin, I founded the second company, which is called Inside Out Software. And I was only there for like 9 months before the 8-bit industry crashed in early '89. The whole thing just was collapsing. And I'm like, well, I have 2 kids and a wife, and I need to make money, and I have to work on the PC. And everybody in the Apple world hated the PC, absolutely, like hated them.
They still do.
Yeah, still do. And it was probably worse back then. No, it's probably the same. It's probably the same.
Yeah.
If you go and read, the comments online. So I didn't care. I needed to learn how to code on a PC because that was where the future was. 8-bit was finished. So SoftDisk was a place that Jay, he was working at Uptime, and we kept in touch, and even Uptime was talking about hiring me because I went to a trade show, and Uptime and SoftDisk and Origin wanted to hire me. I'm like, obviously I'm going to Origin. So Jay was still at Uptime, and then he was going to leave Uptime, and he was going to SoftDisk. So when I left my startup, I basically said, well, Jay's down at SoftDisk. It's nice and hot down there. I'm in New Hampshire. It's really cold. So I basically called up the company and said, I want to talk to the president. And I just said, hey, my name's John Romero. And he's like, oh, I've heard about you. And I was like, really? And it was because Jay was there, and this guy, Mike Amarillo, who was the managing editor of Uptime, who was in charge of everybody there, he went to SoftDisk as well, which is why Jay went down there. So he said, yeah, I'll send plane tickets. So he sent plane tickets, and I flew there, and it was awesome, and said, yeah, let's do it. And then I got hired at SoftDisk.
Very good. So we're going to look at some of your early games. This is the picture quiz, of course. We'll get into a couple of these in a sec, but can you just tell us what was your first game and what was your first published game? Because I've read a couple of different things, I've seen lists, Crazy Climber clone that you did, Dodgeon, Scout Search, Craven Crusader, Jumpster. What was your first game and what was your first published game?
Well, the first game that I wrote that eventually got published was called Jumpster in 1983, but that's not the first game that got published. So I wrote a game called Scout Search. I think it was at the end of 1983, and it got published in 1984. So it was the first published game, but it was not written first. Jumpster was not written first either. I mean, Jumpster was like many, many, many games later, but it's the first one that eventually got published in 1987. So I wrote it in 83, and it got published in 87. There were a lot of games I wrote in 83 that got eventually published in 87, and that was like the first year that I learned assembly language, and I was just like living on on paper for half the year, and then the other half was like getting that stuff on the computer.
Get it in the computer. So we've mentioned it already. Do we want to shout out what that one is? All at once, go on. Nobody know? Scout Search. It is indeed Scout Search. So text adventures and that kind of game were really very much of the time. Can you tell us a bit about this? Why you wrote it? How you went about writing it? Was it
a low-res game?
Was it all menu driven, or was it a text parser?
It was an action game. So that game took me, I think, half an hour to write it, and I was trying to get games sold into magazines, but they were always rejecting my games up until Scout Search. And the reason was because if I send them a big, long assembly language listing, you can't, that's so much stuff to type in. And they want the assembly language to actually have annotations to kind of teach the people who are typing it in how it works. So it can't be long, and it has to be descriptive, and all the stuff I'd written before that was not that. So when I made Scout Search, yeah, you see, 1983, it was published in June of 1984. What I did was I thought, if I make a really small game that has basic to do, all the stuff that would take a ton of lines in assembly, and then just keep the core of the game in assembly language in real small, maybe they'll like that, and they totally did. So it was only 2 pages, really. It was like, there's 2 pages of my writing the story of the game and what you do, and then a little bit of basic, and then a little chunk of hex values, which is machine language. on a third page. That was it. So it was really short, and they loved it. And I'm like, that's the formula. And then everything I wrote after that was published by magazines. And so this one was supposed to be small in scope, and that means it's going to be pretty quick to write. And that was written, I think probably around August, September of '83. And I had a computer then, so I could basically just pound it out pretty quickly. And I had an assembler, so it was easy for me to put the code in an editor and just assemble it and run it and make it work. And the graphics were low res, which is really pretty simple. Yeah. So yeah, it only took me, I was like, how about a maze? And in the maze are like 10 dots, and those dots represent scouts. And you're the scoutmaster, and there's a grizzly bear that's going to rip up all the scouts, right? And it's bouncing around randomly, so it's not like it's like just going to kill them, with intent. But you have to save them as much as you can, and the game's over when there's like none left to save. Yeah. And there's a little scream when they get eaten by the bear. So that was what Scout Search was.
And we were talking yesterday about whether or not you were a touch typist, and you went through the process of learning to touch type because you didn't want any barrier to getting your games in. You wanted them in that computer.
Yeah, because I was using just 2 fingers, and I needed to like really just touch type without looking at the keyboard. So when I was in high school, I took a typing class. And that typing class was on mechanical typewriters. So if you type too fast, like the keys get jammed up together. So you have to like you have to kind of get a rhythm, for how slow you could how slow you had to type. And then when I came here to England, then they had electric typewriters, and I took another typing class. And then I could get much faster, but not as fast as a computer. Which I could actually type to get a directory on an Apple II. You type catalog, and I could just go like that and type catalog. I just go, I was really fast. Yeah, it was really fast.
So did I make this one too difficult? I know a few were struggling with this. Do we know what this one is?
It's not small enough.
No. Any ideas? No, it is Might and Magic 2, Gates to Another World from '89.
Yep.
So things have moved on a little bit. You can see the rest of the screen there.
Okay.
So we got this little bit up here.
And this, yeah.
So this kind of game is one that I played at the time, but not really since. But it's one of those where you would get a piece of paper and map it out, and you draw a map of the game.
Yeah.
Were you playing games like this at the time, as well as making games? Where you were,
I played everything.
D&D player, that kind of thing?
Every single game. Yeah. This Might and Magic, which just came from Bard's Tale, which came from Ultima and Wizardry, and then just Maze games in the 70s, and so they just have a different story around them and different stuff. So this was, this isn't the actual one that I did, and mine came out, I think it was in '88, maybe '89, because they did the original on the Apple II, and then there were a bunch of ports, and so I worked on a port from the Apple II to the Commodore 64, which was really pretty difficult to do because the Apple II had 16 colors at any point on the screen. Any pixel could be 16 colors, and the Commodore was hugely restricted in the 16 colors you could use. So it was an interesting process getting the game running on the Commodore, but this isn't the Commodore version because the background was black and everything.
There's another one I cheated a bit with.
There's more colors in here.
I didn't want everyone to get all the questions right. So we can look at the next one then. This one, a bit more familiar then probably. What's that one?
Heretic.
I heard someone shout it. It's Heretic, yeah. Absolutely there. So
yeah, that gives it away, the Phoenix staff.
Yeah.
The rocket launcher.
And I left it in the screenshot for you to see as well. So probably not the game that people think of first when they think of John Romero, but I mean, was it a fun game to make? Were you happy with the end result?
Yeah, it was. When we came out with Doom, it was basically everyone had the most fun playing Doom. It was. If you were around in 1994, every magazine in the industry that came out could not stop talking about Doom for the whole year of '94, and I'd never seen anything like it other than like Super Mario 3 when it came out, and it was in all the magazines everywhere, or Zelda: Link to the Past. So it was saturated everywhere, and I wanted to play more games like Doom. So I wanted other people to be making games like that, and the easiest way to do it is to license our engine that we wrote. And so I found Raven Software, who was in Wisconsin. I found them back in 1991 and tried to get them into the PC market, and they didn't want to. They wanted to stay making Amiga games. And I was like, dude, it's dead. Like, you need to move on the PC. And they're like, no, we want to stay on the Amiga. I was like, well, I'll talk to you later then. So then they, we actually, before Heretic, we took Wolfenstein's code and we kind of made it more advanced, and that's the Shadowcaster engine. So they made Shadowcaster with EA, and that's using the Wolfenstein Plus engine that we had made. And so they were into the PC mode at that point. And after Doom, we had our engine ready, and I'd been talking to them. Okay, when we're done, how about you guys make a game with our engine? Because their art was so good, and their programmers, excellent programmers, and just a really good company. And that was just from us being up in Wisconsin for 6 months when we met them. And so I just liked them. I thought they were really good guys. And they said, yeah, let's do it. And I went up to Raven and spent probably a week. We bought all the computers and had them shipped over to their office, and they didn't touch them because they didn't understand how to use these machines, because we didn't make Doom or Doom 2 or Quake or Heretic or Hexen on DOS PCs. We made them on Next Step workstations. And the Next Step is on an operating system that today is OS 10. That's what you're running on a Mac. So back then, that was the Steve Jobs company, and we got these workstations that were, back then, DOS games were 3020 by 200, and we have workstations that are 1024 by 768 with 16-bit true color and everything. It was really nice. And we sent all those up there. We bought the whole dev team these computers. I flew up there, and and I basically spent a whole week networking the computers together, showing the programmers how to modify the code, what the file structure was for everything, how to tweak it and run it and see how it works. And then I trained the level designers how to use my DoomEd editor that I made to create all the levels in Doom, and showed them how they make levels and how they would tweak it and change it for the stuff that they're doing. And it's a lot of work, to do a full, before Heretic, I don't think anybody had done a TC, which is called a total conversion of Doom, but that's kind of what this was, but more of a total conversion because it's also code, which nobody had back then when they were doing mods of Doom. They just used a program called dhack that they could just poke numbers into the executable and hope cool things happen. But with code, you could actually do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And this is before we put the source code out there. So they basically make Heretic, and I told them it's got to be medieval. Don't change the weapons. Like, Doom's weapons are perfectly balanced. Just make them look differently, and it will feel really good when you play it. So it's basically a medieval Doom, and all new levels and sound effects and all that. So it was like I was executive producer and game designer on it, and just talked to the designers, and we just, for a whole year, I was just taking their feedback, getting the latest versions, giving them feedback, modifying stuff, having our artists, while we're making Doom 2, we're looking at Heretic graphics and having them tweak things or throw things away. And it was just a real super collaborative process. And then near the end of the project, then I flew back up there to help ship the game. So that was basically writing all of the Heretic dedicated versions of the utilities, like serial setup and IPX setup and stuff that you use to get the game connected by modem and over an IPX network. I think maybe even the DM program I wrote to just make deathmatch happen without having to do command line stuff. And also at the same time I'd been working with a company called Dwango to do, it's before the internet happened, so it was kind of like you ran a client and it connected into a computer where everybody is sitting there in a lobby waiting to deathmatch, or they're already deathmatching. You can see what the score is in real time. And I wrote the Dwango client as well, so I put that on Heretic as well. So there's lots of tools, getting it shipped, no bugs, and then when I got back, I made the master disk, and then I uploaded it on December 23rd of 1994 at 11:30 at night.
And we'll talk a bit later on again about some of the tools you created. But so when you're making games like this, you said your engine's out there, and you're revamping things, keeping the weapons the same but different. So how do you keep it fresh for the players, and how do you keep it interesting for you? Because are you not just doing the same thing over and over again to make games?
No, this one, this was like, what would it be like to make a medieval version of Doom, but to be more of an RPG? So without going, like Heretic, Hexen was the next step. This one here was, let's have an inventory. So this one had an inventory system in it, so you could hold health, you could hold potions and fly and all kinds of stuff. And that's why I was kind of trying to make the D&D like FPS, just slowly evolving it and see how it works in like baby steps of design. So in this game you could fly, you get the Wings of Wrath and you can fly, and you have a whole inventory. Every weapon in here you have alternate firing, so you can fire any weapon a second way, and so that kind of doubled the number of weapons. So it was a lot of really cool experimentation, using a different group of people who had different ideas, and how they would approach making a full game with our technology, and it just worked really, really well.
So you've got a lot of new technical stuff in there as well that maybe people don't see when they're playing the game.
More game design stuff. The technical stuff that they did, the programming for it wasn't anything new or crazy. It was mostly just new design ideas that they had to implement. And then it was just like, does it feel good having an inventory? Is it OP? Is it overpowered because you can hold all this stuff and use it later? And it ended up that it wasn't. It was just like make the level difficult enough that you're going to be using that stuff up. And then with Hexen, we basically went another step further.
Okay, let's look at the next one then, and I played a bit fast and loose with this one, but I did want to discuss this platform, if you like. Does anyone know what that one was?
Red Faction 2.
It was Red Faction 1, but I'll let you off. So this, not strictly speaking one of your games, but you did do this for mobile. Can you tell us about the challenges of doing mobile games? Did you like doing mobile games? Or were you more at home on the PC, just sitting there typing away?
Well, yeah, I mean, the PC had been doing for forever, but mobile was, this was in 2003. The original Red Faction was in 2001, I think, but our port was in 2003. And mobile gaming was just beginning in like the late 90s. Very, very early, horrible technology. It was really bad. It was J2ME and Brew and stuff. And so I wanted to get into it. So after Ion Storm, I started a company called Monkey Stone Games with Tom Hall, who we had co-founded id Software. And this was basically to make mobile games. And we started out with a game called Hyperspace Delivery Boy, which was on a Pocket PC, which is like a prototype. It's like an early version of the iPhone, but Microsoft was making it. And so that was our first mobile thing, and we started making a lot. We made about 15 different things on mobile at that time, just within a few years. And when Nokia came out with their the N-Gage, which was a pretty horrible phone.
Yeah.
But it was the only phone that had a company behind it that was dedicated to gaming, because no one else had kind of stepped up to support gaming. And they actually made a phone that had kind of a controller to it.
Yeah.
You could screw in a joystick into it. It was like the only thing that anybody had back then that was like, yeah, we want to do games. And so I I'll support any mobile company back then that will do games. So I basically was in touch with those guys, and they had THQ had a Red Faction license, and they basically said, yeah, how about making the mobile version of this? And this was on an N-Gage, which was the use of the Symbian operating system. So it was not Brew. It was this other horrible OS. It was the S60 operating system, and it was so bad. But I used a company. I used an engine called the Xforge engine, which was written by a company called Fat Hammer in Helsinki, and R.J. McCall, who created the Amiga and the Atari handheld Lynx system, he also co-founded Fat Hammer, and I knew R.J. So I got in touch with those guys and decided to use the Xforge engine, which is a 3D engine. And it was running on the N-Gage, which is a 100 megahertz ARM chip. So 100 megahertz. And on an ARM chip, if you have an instruction off by 1 byte, the whole thing crashes. Like you can't have an odd byte. So there's lots of issues back then. But it was probably, I think, 10 months to make Red Faction on the N-Gage, and it was a lot of stuff that we had to do to make it work. But it was I think for 100 megahertz back then on a handheld, and it was also the very first Bluetooth deathmatch game that had been made. So that was also kind of nightmarish, getting the first deathmatch, because Bluetooth, you couldn't have more than like 4 phones in the same area, because Bluetooth back then would just wash out all the signals and no one could connect to each other. So you had to be really careful with it, and that was like the source of all kinds of debugging nightmares.
Doesn't sound like a great time, but was it an interesting technical challenge?
Yeah, it was great. First deathmatch, Bluetooth game, and Red Faction was cool. You know, use the Geomod engine where you could just like destroy parts of the environment and stuff. So we had to kind of simulate that with the Xforge engine. They're totally different technologies, so we had to kind of simulate the things that you would do in the PS2, I think it was back then, the PS2 version. And it ended up being pretty cool. You could play it. It had a frame rate. that was important.
So we're going to hear one D word now then. Which version is this? Anyone know? Doom 64
All right.
is correct. So Doom.
There it is.
Here it is.
Doom 64 specifically.
Yeah. So anything in particular that stands out about this version of a game that pretty much cemented your name in the industry?
Yeah.
Is that fair to say, do you think?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is we didn't actually, this came out before then, I think. Maybe it did. I mean, I was there when it was being made, and I left id in 1996. But Midway was a company that had been making games for decades. And they were, we respected them. They did a great job doing the PlayStation version of Doom. And when they were talking to us about doing an N64 version of Doom, we totally trusted them because they did such a good job, plussing the original Doom on PS2. So we kind of let them do what they wanted with Doom 64 without interfering with them. So they sent their programmer and artist, lead programmer, lead artist, to basically kind of move in with us, not into our office, but across from our office. So Midway kind of, we let them have part of the office. We kind of had the whole floor where we were at. So Aaron Sealer was the name of the guy who was a programmer, and he was, just a really great coder, and the lead artist was excellent too. I mean, he was really, really good, and they decided to just make all new levels and the color lighting and everything. We just said, you guys are Midway, you know what to do, go ahead. It was the only Doom that just didn't have restrictions on it. So that's why it's different than the other Dooms, because we just said, just go do something, because you guys are pros. Versus Raven, who were not professional guys, they were just really brand new. So there was a lot of guiding. These guys have been doing stuff forever.
So of all the platforms that Doom is on, which one is your favourite? Is it always PC?
Yeah, the PC version.
Even though you've gone through quite a few keyboards and mice now.
Yeah. Well, you can mod the PC, you can do all kinds of stuff.
So, tell us about the whole modding culture of Doom. Why did you do that? Why did you give people the reign to mod it and play about with your game?
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny because the only mods that we had ever seen before Doom was changing character stats on data disks, like modifying stats on a disk so you could actually, have your characters pumped up and stuff. That was the only kind of mods that we ever saw. There were these text adventures called Eamon adventures that were built with a basic program that was like the basic template adventure that people would modify and copy them on disks and give them to other people to play their own adventures. So it was like this freeware adventure engine that you could modify and hand out in the 80s. And so we saw that. So it wasn't, the idea wasn't like a brand new idea, but it was something that we had not really seen on the Apple II too much, other than that text adventure thing. So when we put out Wolfenstein, people started modding Wolfenstein, and it was very difficult to mod Wolfenstein because it was not made for modding. It was all the data in Wolfenstein was totally compressed with a proprietary format that we invented, and to decompress it, the key to that was also hidden in the executable and compressed as well. So it was insane that people could actually change make levels for Wolfenstein and mod the graphics and stuff, because it was just not meant to do that. And when we saw that, while we're making Doom, we're watching, at the end of '92 and then during '93, we saw people were modding Wolfenstein, and we're just like, people want to mod our stuff, and they will, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
So why don't we just open the whole thing up and make it easy, and in fact just hand out all the specs to everybody? Why not just give them the file formats of everything? Why at least we won't write the editors for them.
Yeah.
Because it was on Next Step, and that doesn't translate over. It's written in Objective-C and all this, and that doesn't translate over to DOS. So we'll just give them all the file formats for our levels and just let them write their own editors with that. So that's what we did. We opened it up so it wasn't compressed, and we gave them all the specs, and people just started writing DEU and all kinds of editors back then. Tons of stuff appeared, and then people started making levels, and the internet was flooded with thousands of levels.
Yeah, and Doom is one of those that it seems to run on everything. People have ported it to just about everything. I've played it on an iPod video, the scrolly wheel iPod.
It runs on the
video.
keyboard key.
Yeah,
Because it has LED like little screens on keyboard keys, and they can run on a single key.
Unbelievable. so if all those crazy homebrew platforms and
everything
where Doom is playable, which one of those has intrigued you the most? Have you ever thought, wow, this is really good?
Well, what if I was actually pretty impressed with the Super Nintendo version of Doom. Because that's not like, well, let's say it's impressive to see that you could run Doom on a printer screen, which was a demonstration of how you could hack into a printer and destroy its ROM. You basically hack it over a network and upload Doom and erase the ROM, and Doom's the only thing that runs on the printer. Like that's what they were doing in security, just to prove like you gotta really like put some encryption on your Wi-Fi on your printers. So the Doom SNES version was interesting because Doom was on a bunch of platforms that we had decided that we wanted back then. The Doom 32X and the N64 version, the Jaguar version, Saturn, all that stuff back then. So we had worked with companies and gave them the source. And this is before we released the source to the world. We gave them the source and basically showed them how it worked and let them do the ports. We did not let anybody do the Super Nintendo port because there's no way it was going to run on the Super Nintendo, because it was just the Super Nintendo hardware is not made for the way that Doom draws graphics on the screen. Doesn't use the chips in the same way at all. So basically one of the best companies in the industry back then, Sculptured Software in Salt Lake City, Utah, they made some of the best games. They did all the Super Star Wars games. They did Simpsons, they did so much stuff on the Super Nintendo, and they were really good. They were so good that they even made their own Super Nintendo development hardware, not sanctioned by Nintendo, and they were also making gaming systems that they could then sell to Boeing and you could play it on airplanes. Like, this was a serious company. They were really good. They had the best in the industry.
Do you know if John Carlson was there? Because he wrote a SNES, or built a SNES dev unit. I think he built two of them, because to buy them, they were the crazy money, 60,000 or something to buy one.
From Nintendo, you had to be licensed and all that, and then you had to buy the thing. But people were making, they were starting to make, there was one called the Sluggo that was popular. It was only like a couple $1,000. And I think we got one of those internally when we had to do Wolfenstein on the SNES. But this hardware that they did at Sculptured was only for them. So it wasn't released to anybody else. It was just for their own internal use. And what they did was basically one day this cartridge just showed up at the office, and we're like, what? Super Nintendo? And we put it in and ran it, and it was like, no way did this run. It was so unbelievable that Doom ran on the Super Nintendo. It was like, well, only these guys could do it. These guys in Nintendo, So they didn't have to do anything. It was like, I guess we just sign a contract and start selling it. This thing is finished. They never asked any permission or anything. They just loved the game, and they just ported it and sent it to us. And that was it. And we're like, okay. published it. It's awesome.
Do you know
So-
how they did it? Was it an extra chip in the cartridge?
Yeah, the
'Cause I know a
FX
lot
chip.
of-
yeah.
FX
So there was
chip,
there was an FX chip that added some megahertz and some better rendering. Because back then you could actually incorporate new hardware into cartridges, to kind of speed things up. So that's what they did. They put the FX chip in there, which I think was used for Star Fox, maybe.
Yeah.
So it was as good as it got on a Super Nintendo, and that was how they could actually get it going at that speed, was just because there was an FX chip in it.
And you didn't have to do anything.
We didn't have to do anything. In fact, we didn't have to do anything for most of them. We actually did the Jaguar port ourselves in-house.
Right.
I think we spent about maybe 3 weeks on it.
How was that to work on? Because it was a horrible machine to work on, wasn't it?
No, actually, it was really. We had a really good development system because we were still, I believe, working on Nexet machines when we were doing the Jaguar version as well, and we could use C on the Jaguar, which is nice. We didn't have to convert the whole game into assembly language or anything. We just had to get an assembler that would, I think, write to a 68K chip, generate that code, but it wasn't that bad. And when we did the work, it was really only 3-4 of us that did the work on that. It was like John Carmack was basically porting the engine part of it over, and Sean moved into my office for these 2 weeks, and we basically got all the auto map stuff in the menus and the intermissions and everything, all the stuff outside of the actual 3D screen rendering. We got everything else running pretty quickly. John got the engine and the AI and all that stuff working, and then the artists did any kind of weird palette conversion that they had to do for the Jaguar, and it was just like 2-3 weeks, something like that. It was pretty quick.
Right.
We
So
did things fast.
if we go for our interval in a second, is there one thing you've not told anyone before about Doom, or is it just all out there? You've talked about it so much.
Wow. What have I not?
You can think and tell us after the interval if you like.
Yeah, I'll think about it. Yeah, I'll think about it. I'm sure there's something.
Okay, so we'll take maybe a 5-10 minute break. So don't hang around too long. We will get started again in about 10 minutes. So, can we resume proceedings then? So this was round 2, which you didn't get to take part in, but John will, of course. And these are reviews and quotes about John's games. So we'll see how many he can recognise.
What
and then
is?
Here are a couple of snippets about each game. So there we go. One of the things that make this game unique is that instead of just having a limited amount of ammunition, you have a shotgun and can shoot 8 bullets at any given time.
Do you want me to answer that?
I want you to answer
What
that.
is Dangerous Dave in the Haunted Mansion?
Of course it's Dangerous Dave and the Haunted Mansion. So there you go.
Yeah.
Now this is the first I think we've talked about tonight with alliteration. And you showed me a list yesterday, and I know you've been asked the question before. You have a lot of alliteration in your game titles. It's something that you just like doing. So tell us about Dangerous Dave.
Yeah, Dangerous Dave, actually, this one is 1991. The original was written in 1988. And there's like 9 different Dangerous Dave games. I made some of them, and then Softisk also made more out there. And then I bought all the rights to Dangerous Dave back in 2015. So now I own Dangerous Dave again because it was like 2 other companies had it. And Dangerous Dave was just basically doing the D's in the alphabet. And I've done Alien Attack and Cavern Crusader and, Neptune's Nasties, Major Mayhem, trying to get every letter, making a game for every letter in the alphabet.
Commander Keen by sound.
Commander Keen was sounding like it. The Cavern Crusader and City Centurion, those are the real C's. So yeah, I just thought it was a fun. It was like very 80s, I think. Games in the 80s had crazy, weird names. I made a game called Subnodule in the 80s. It only had 1 S, but I did Scout Search.
You did,
That's the S's. Twilight Treasures, just a ton of games like that. And Dangerous Dave was actually a demonstration game. The first Dangerous Dave that I made was to demonstrate a language add-on that I had made back then. So people were programming in BASIC, and what I did was I made a bunch of machine language code that would connect to BASIC, so they could. I created a bunch of new commands, and in your BASIC code, you could type in these special commands, and now bitmap graphics are on the screen, moving around really fast. And so to demonstrate how that worked, I made Dangerous Dave use it So they didn't have to type it in. They actually got a disc that had Dangerous Dave on it, and it's a game. You can play it and everything, but it's also a demonstration. This is how this code works. It could work this way for you, but here's the demo. So Dangerous Dave was, it was not the main event on the very first 1988 version, and this is on an Apple II. In 1990, then I did the PC version of Dangerous Dave, which is the one that went everywhere. And that one was also a demonstration it was basically freeware. It was put on a disc with a game that John Carmack made called Catacomb. And this disc was handed out to about 50,000 subscribers to show that this new game disc that we were making called Gamer's Edge, it was going to be full of games like this. Every 2 months you'll get a new game. And so there were just demonstrations of it. So this game, it was okay to hand out Dangerous Dave for free on the PC to anyone that you wanted, because we wanted the word out there. Hey, you guys want to buy Gamer's Edge? So it was a demonstration game. It was for free. And then I did a remake of Dangerous Dave in 2015, the original one, put it out there with an HD version, and I put it out for free on iOS. So like Dave's been free basically the entire time it's been around.
And it's very different to some of the games we've talked about already tonight.
Yeah, this is like a classic Mario platform type game. Unbelievably, in India, it was more popular than Doom.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, because in India, the computers were so old and they weren't fast. They were actual 8088s, 8086s. They didn't have 386s in India, until probably 2000. And so Dave was written in, it was fast assembly language, and it ran at a really good fast speed, and no matter how fast the machine was, it always ran at the same speed. So you can run it right now on some 5 gigahertz CPU, and it will still run the exact same speed that it ran from 1990.
And not everything does that.
Yeah, not everything does that. So in India, it was copied everywhere. In fact, when you bought a PC in India, they just copied Dangerous Dave there. So it were Minesweeper and Solitaire and Dangerous Dave, right? And so like everybody's played it in India, and it's funny, anytime that we meet people who are from India, we go, do you know Dangerous Dave? You ever played it? And they're like, Dave? Yeah!
Dave.
And it's just Dave. They never, because it was Dave.exe, so they just called it Dave. And they could just copy it. And the funny thing, that game was only 73K.
Wow.
Like that's the size of it on disk, because it's compressed down from 150K, but still that's a small size game, and that had 10 levels. It had CJ, EJ, and VJ graphics all in it, and you could switch at any time. You could be jumping in switch graphic modes. It's the only game that did that on the PC. But people play it all the time. Like if you go to YouTube and you just type Dangerous Dave, you'll see there are thousands of YouTube Dangerous Dave videos out there. People doing speed runs through it and all kinds of stuff. And now there's iOS YouTube videos, and them trying to get through the iOS version.
Excellent. Next one then. Time stands still for no one, especially not Doom clones. The game features seemingly countless secret passages. Don't forget to break the windows. And exploring a level poses more of a challenge than Doom or Quake ever did.
What is Hexen?
Oh, look at that. So, why did Heretic need a sequel?
Well, because Raven was just like at full speed ahead. Like they knew how to make a game with us, and this was Hexen was going to be awesome, right? They'd already shown us that they could do a really great job making a game, taking direction and changing the engine and modifying it. And so when we started Hexen, I said, all right, time for the sequel. And we'll do a trilogy of games. And so I said, let's do the sequel. In this one, we're going to keep the same kind of features that we had in the first one, but I want to have character classes now. So I want to have a cleric, and I want to have a cleric, a wizard, and a fighter kind of character. And I want it to be, I thought that the idea of having a hub level system would be pretty cool in FPS instead of just level progression linearly through the whole thing. I thought, how about if you have a hub and you go out from the hub and you come back? You do things out there or get things, come back to the hub and you unlock the hub, and the hub unlocks all the way until you can then travel from that hub to the next hub, and now you got to unlock that hub and eventually get to the end of the game. And just make a different level layout, or different layout that's not so linear. So you could go to any of the 7 portals in the first level and finish the game from that point, or finish the hub from that point. And so that was what I wanted to do, was this hub level system, character classes. I limited the music somewhat, which may or may not have been a good thing. I told the Kevin Schilder, who was the audio composer, that I wanted to restrict him to a certain number of instruments within a hub. So don't use too many instruments and make the music kind of sound similar. And then we get to the next hub, maybe add one and subtract. We'll take one away and add another one to substitute it. So the music didn't sound as I think interesting as Heretic's music, where you could just do whatever. But it did give the game a certain mood by limiting its palette of general MIDI, sound effects. I think that Hexen turned out really great. It was too hard. It was really hard, and it was because I kind of let them go on the design side. I let them just do what you guys think is going to be is going to be really great. And the first hub was called 7 Portals, and that's too much for the first player kind of coming into the game. It should have been 3 portals. They should have just had to go to 3 levels and come back and quickly unlock that hub. Instead, it was 7, and it was huge. And so it kind of felt like it was too long before you got that reward of getting to the next hub. But people that really like difficult games, Hexen's really great. It's a really great game for that. And it had lots of cool stuff. Deathmatch was amazing. You got to build an ultimate weapon. Each of the character classes got an ultimate weapon that you had to find the pieces to it and put them together. It was a really great game.
I think that came out on Saturn as well, wasn't it? Did you work on the Saturn version?
No, that was just another company doing that.
Right, okay.
Yeah, we actually didn't. I was the only one working on any of the Raven stuff. There was no one else involved, except when I needed Adrian to give me some critique on some of their designs, like the Wraith Verge, which was the cleric's ultimate weapon, which is this cross. When they had drawn it originally, it was a big shiny golden cross, and I'm like, this cross shoots out like spirits, evil spirits, that just shred things apart. Like, it shouldn't be happy, gold shiny thing. So they made this black evil looking cross, and that was like, now you got it. That's perfect, and it sounds amazing when it goes off and everything. Yeah. But Hexen was a really great game, and the third one was supposed to be called Hecatome. And they worked on Hecatome for a little bit, but then I left id, and then Activision jumped on them and took over and broke the team apart and made them start making a bunch of other games. And Hecatome, they didn't carry the design forward, and they got the design changed, and then that became Hexen 2, because Activision basically said, no, you got Heretic and Hexen, and those are 2 different lines instead of being the same thing in the same line series, of the trilogy.
Okay, next one then. Remains fun after all these years. Spawned the first-person shooter genre. The action is satisfying, and there are plenty of secrets to find. It's been mentioned so far.
Yeah. Well, I could say Catacomb 3D, but it's probably going to be
It's
Wolfenstein.
something 3D.
Yeah,
it's Wolfenstein 3D,
Yeah.
So we did talk about it earlier. What I wanted to ask you about in particular was, obviously, all the Nazi material that's in there. Did you ever consider maybe we should tone that down? Maybe we should make it something different? We'll just have some other castle, not a Nazi castle. Was it ever a thought that you processed?
When we were thinking, so I came up with the idea for Wolfenstein 3D when we were trying to think of what is going to be the next game. Like, we're going to do a shooter. We, in fact, were already starting to make another trilogy of Commander King games, and probably worked on it for 2 weeks and just went, you know what? Screw Keen. We're done with this. We have to go 3D. We have to push further, because Catacomb 3D really showed texture mapped, a texture mapped 3D environment. It could be even better, than the design that we had, because it was like you're shooting fireballs out of your hand, which is weak. It needed to be guns, to be satisfying, and we hadn't really done that yet. And when Tom, who's the creative director at the time, it was kind of up to him to come up with the ideas for these things, and we would just make them like turbo speed. It was easier for us to make the games when Tom just like said, all right, we're going to make this game, and here's all the stuff, and we just go, and it's done in 2 months. That's usually how long it took us to make a game back then. 2 months.
Wow.
There was a lot of training and making a lot of games. Like in 1991, we made 11 games because we made games in 2 months, but we made 2 games at a time simultaneously. So it was a lot of stuff. So anyway, with Wolfenstein, Tom came up with the idea that what if we had a big building that was a big scientific research facility that had gone, genetic engineering gone wrong, and all the mutant creatures were in it, and just destroying all the scientists and stuff. You had to go in there and save the scientists and blow away all the mutants and save the facility and don't let it leak out. Very Half-Life-ish. Before Half-Life. But we, I just said, no way, that's like the stupidest idea. Like that's like B-movie central, like what B-movie doesn't have that in it? We need to do something that's like really cool and violent. Like I don't think cool when I think about that. And then it just popped in my head, why don't we just do a remake of Wolfenstein 3D, but that's violent? And there was only 4 of us, and John and Tom were just like, oh my God, that's exactly. And I was like, Nazis, blowing away Nazis. Who's gonna get mad at you for blowing away Nazis? There's no Nazis left. Like no one can do anything but laugh. So we found out years later that Jewish kids loved Wolfenstein because it was like revenge.
Wow.
Yeah, they loved playing Wolfenstein. So anyway, it was like there was no issue with doing that. And in fact, when we were thinking, while we're making the game, we were thinking, what else could we do? How about terrorism? What if we just blow away terrorists? And we're like, it's a little too close. Like someone could actually do something. Someone could do something to us. And this is in the 90s. Yeah. Terrorists are real though. Yeah. So let's not do that.
So when you're saying you're making a game in 2 months, and obviously technology is always moving on at a pace, as are the skills of your team. Do you ever get to a point in a game where you think, I really have to stop putting things in this now and get it out, we'll do it in the next game? Were you thinking about the next game, or were you thinking, maybe I could just squeeze that in?
We didn't usually think about the next game. It was always, this has got to be the best game. And we did as much as we could, but we'd been making games for so long. At that time, if you look at, Wolfenstein was my 87th game. And the other guys, like Tom, probably the same thing. He made so many games. If you look at Tom's actual list of credits, he made so many adventure games in the 80s, it's nuts, dozens of them. John Carmack made a bunch of RPGs before, ever working at id. So we were really good and really fast at making games, so our focus could just stay on this game that we were making, because we knew the next game, we'll just come up with something new, and it'll be for the time that we're coming up with it, not let's come up with an idea that we'll make 3 years later. It's like, what is the cool thing right now? So the focus was on what we were making, to just focus everything on that thing and make it as good as we could at that time. And that was what we focused on. It wasn't really something in the future. It was just that thing that we were doing.
The here and now. Okay, next one then. In some circles, the console-inspired PC platformer developed by id Software is regarded as a classic. It was always better suited to a platform where instant save games could make up for its frantic gameplay and cranked difficulty.
Well, that's Commander Keen.
Obviously, yeah. Commander Keen, there you go.
Yeah.
So you're mainly known for 2 genres, I guess. One in particular, the FPS, and the other, the platformer.
Right.
Were you just making shit that you like to play? I mean,
well, the thing was with Commander Keen, like Dangerous Dave, I made a platformer, right? I made several before, but say Dangerous Dave I made Dangerous Dave in 1990, just months before this. And it wasn't a scrolling screen. It was static because so many games back then were static because the PC really didn't do smooth scrolling. Because VGA screens they're expensive. It's a lot of data, and the way that you would normally program them through the BIOS was kind of a set way that people could program, but it's not really fast. to make something go really fast, you have to change the way you use that memory and play with registers that aren't really, they're not available through the BIOS, which most people use to program. So for Commander Keen, I had a book that I gave to John, which was written by Michael Abrash, that had everything in it. Every little piece of hardware that had to do with CGA, EGA, and VGA. It was called Power Graphics Programming, and I gave it to John. And he, first thing he did was he got vertical smooth scrolling working using the panning registers, and we started making a game called Slordax at that time, which was basically a Xevious clone. And when I saw it, I was like, that's really nice and smooth, but horizontal is where everything changes. Like if you do horizontal, that will be the coolest thing ever. So after Slordax, he then started working on the horizontal panning, which is a much bigger problem to do that. That's how the Nintendo worked. That's how you could get platformers working on Commodores and stuff. But the PC never had hardware like that, except it actually did, but people didn't know how to use it. So EGA cards came out in like '83, I think. And since the PC came out in August of '81, and we're talking 1990s, like 9 years later, and nobody has made a PC screen scroll smoothly. And the scrolling that I talk about to kind of keep it simple for people, I say it's like per pixel scrolling. It was actually sub-pixel scrolling. It was actually less than a pixel. You could actually make it move and see half a pixel on the screen. So it was like that kind of control with Commander Keen. And when he got that working, it was like now the PC is a Mario, it's a Nintendo, right? The PC is now a Nintendo with this horizontal scrolling, because Mario sold that platform. That was the game to show everybody, like, here's what you can do with a Nintendo. And it was the king at that time with Super Mario 3 was out, 17 million copies was sold.
Was it the biggest selling NES game?
Yeah, it was a huge game. And so we had it running all the time in the corner. Super Mario 3 was running all the time in the corner.
That's what we want.
Yeah, that was like, we need to do that. And so Tom, it was like 10 o'clock at night. I had left. John just got the stuff working, and he told Tom, "Hey, come in here and look at this." And Tom's like, "Oh, we should totally replicate the first level of Super Mario 3." So he basically came in the room and started using my computer, and he was replicating the graphics just for that first level, while John was getting character jumping and all that stuff. Because what he did was he technically got the screen scrolling, but now he's got to set a game up, right, which is a lot of work. But he's an insane programmer, so he could do that in 6 hours. So they left at 5 in the morning, and they put a disc on my keyboard that just said "Run Me."
Run me, yeah.
Yeah, and so I got it, and I'm like, "Oh, cool stuff, huh?" They must have stayed up late and did something, and I put it in, and I run it, so it just said Dave2.exe on it. And I ran it, and Tom drew Dangerous Dave in copyright infringement because it was a ripoff of Mario. And so that screen came up, and then as soon as I hit the space bar, he even recorded a demo that just played, like in this thing. And so as soon as it started scrolling smoothly, I was like, no way. I was done. I couldn't work. It was like all day long. I couldn't work. There was no way, like everything changed immediately. I could just see like we're not here at this company anymore. Like this company's gone. We have to start our own company. We need to be making stuff like this. This company can't market this stuff because it only markets to subscribers, and there was nothing about getting stuff from retail. Like we're in the wrong place for what this game is. So when they came in, I actually showed that demo to a few other people in the company, and they're like, "Oh, that's kind of cool." I'm like, seriously? This computer doesn't do this. You don't even understand, And I played everything on the PC at that time. Like that was my job, was just to research everything, and I was like, nobody's ever seen this before. So they came in, and I basically said, we're gone. We're out of here, guys. And they're like, what? We need to start a company. Nobody has this, and this company's not going to have this.
Yeah.
So even though we were using that tech to make games for the company, like we were doing that, we were making the games using that tech for soft disk, those things weren't going to go anywhere. We needed to get out and go do it and publish, make our own game that's different than the stuff we're making for soft disk. Get it out there with a publisher or distributor that could get it to the world. And that was actually happening at the same time. Scott Miller was trying to get a hold of me while we were doing this at the same time. And that all worked. All that stuff happened at the same. It was crazy.
Yeah.
Like we made a demo for Nintendo right after that. Because I was like, this is Mario. What if we did Mario on the PC? So we spent a whole week replicating for real the entire first level with the raccoon suit, like all the enemy AI, all the graphics, everything. You're Mario. We did a whole demo, the world map and everything, and sent it to Japan, sent it to Nintendo. And they loved it. They thought it was amazing, but they decided we're not going to take our IP and put it on something that's not our console. So especially the PC, we're not putting it on the PC. So they said, good job, but you can't do it.
Yeah.
And so we said, well, then we'll just make another game. And that's what Commander Keen was.
Commander Keen.
But that Commander Keen that only came about because at the same time, Scott Miller was getting in touch with us and he wanted a game that was like a game I made called Pyramids of Egypt that I had published on soft disk, and I'd made it in 1985, and then I made it in 1989 on the PC, and he'd seen it because he published lots of stuff on soft disk. And he wanted me to make one for him, for his company, that he told me about his company and how many copies of stuff he was selling. I'm like, no way, are you selling stuff like that many copies of stuff? And he's like, yeah, shareware is huge now, it's starting to get huge, and I'd never heard of shareware. So I told him, give us $2,000, and we will make a game for you. And I said, oh, by the way, here, look this is the kind of game it's going to be like. And we sent him the demo, and he was like, oh my God, we have to do it, And so I said, we need $2,000 just to start this thing. I was just going to split it between me, John, and Tom. And so in his bank account, because he spent lots of money getting his company going, he only had $5,000 in his bank account. And so he's like, this is going to be worth it. So he sent us $2,000, and so we decided to start working in September, like around the end of September, started working on Commander Keen. 6 o'clock at night, we're just still at soft disk. We get in at 10, 6 o'clock at night, we change directories, and now we're in the Commander Keen directory. And then we just work until 2 in the morning, go home, go to sleep, come back at 10. And then on Fridays, we would actually take the computers out of the company, take them to the house, and then all weekend long, we'd like the least amount of sleep possible, work on the game all weekend long, bring them back early on Monday morning so no one ever saw us taking them or bringing them back. Because we didn't even have enough money to buy our own computers. Like these are expensive 386, 33 computers with like 4 megs of RAM in them or something. So we did what it took, and it was 3 months, and we made 3 Commander Keen games, and then when we put it out, it was huge. And so we believe in shareware, we believe in this model, this is the way to go, and it was great. Yeah.
Excellent. Next one then, final one. Cross between a first-person shooter and a stat-based, story-driven role-playing game could still have emerged as a good shooter if the action parts had turned out well. Progress is also saved at level transitions. In theory, it's not a bad system. It builds tension by creating an actual penalty for death.
First-person shooter, stat-based, role story, geez.
It's the D word.
Could have. Oh, what, Daikatana?
Yes.
Yeah, you could actually save it at any time that you wanted to with save gems.
Right.
But yeah, it's there was the biggest excuse that I have for Daikatana is that I started a company that got really big, 120 people, and everyone that I hired had never made a game in their life before. And that was because I wanted to hire people from the mod community because they were super passionate about making games or making mods at home. And for many of these people, this is the first job they ever had. So level designers, bot writers that use Quake C for Quake, making Quake bots like the Reaper bot and stuff like that. I was basically hiring a bunch of people that were super passionate enough, they had enough passion that they did this stuff on their own at home, and I wondered what it would be like to build a team out of people that would do this anyway, but now they can get paid to do it. And I hired a bunch of people who did really great stuff, but it was really hard to, like, making a game is not making a mod. It's a totally different process. So it was a lot of work trying to, I mean, I'm surprised the game came out because it was 3 years to make the game, and halfway through development, the team, a bunch of the team left because somebody we fired wanted to get back at us, so they offered them a company and a project, so they left to go do that. And I had to go rehire new people and then redo work and all that stuff. So it was like a big soap opera.
Did you redo things quite a few times on there?
As least as possible. I didn't, because that was just time is money, and didn't want to spend forever doing it, but I wanted it to be good. So it was just a ton of work. And the person who did, like, the biggest problem that I think a lot of people had, beside the first level being green and having mosquitoes attacking you, was the AI had issues. And the AI was really new. Like the stuff that the AI had, the sidekicks and Daikatana, the stuff that they do is beyond what a lot of games do nowadays. Like you could be, to be able to run around in a room and there's tables and chairs and there's bookcases and there's, like an air duct shaft up on top. You could run around and jump up on all this stuff, crouch and go into the shaft, and your sidekicks would do the exact same thing and come up there. And if you decided, oh no, I forgot to get a power up in the other room, you turn around and they'll turn around and they'll move back out of the shaft with you. They did a lot of really advanced things. And the person who had written that code had never even programmed. Like, he'd never written code before. So it was like he was a new programmer, he'd never written AI, it was like all this new stuff. So, of course, there were going to be errors and issues and stuff, but they like, it was trial by fire for the whole team. And they actually made something that shipped, so that was like a big deal that they actually did that. But we took a big hit. Luckily, just a few months later, Deus Ex came out, so Iron Storm wasn't totally destroyed.
Right. Yeah. So if you could do the game again, A, would you? And B, what would you do differently?
Well, nobody wants to see that game again. If I did, I would use a new engine. I would probably use Unreal 4, and I would change a lot of things
Different
about
team.
it. Well, yeah, it would be obviously a different team, but it would be probably different in a lot of different ways. But like, I don't really want to.
Do you think?
There's too many ideas for games. Why would I want to go redo something?
Yeah. Do you think the criticisms of it are justified, or is it not as bad as all that?
It is. Yeah, I think there's like, it has really great deathmatch, and like right now you could be playing on a Daikatana server, deathmatch in Germany, especially on the weekends. Lots of people play deathmatch Daikatana still. In fact, there's more people playing Daikatana than some released games right now. Huh. Because it has a hardcore multiplayer following still. And I gave the source code out to a team years ago, probably about 3 years ago, and so they've already fixed all the bugs that were in the game. They've improved lots of stuff, and it's free. It's a free version 1.3 download, and so you can actually play the game without issues, with like the latest graphics and everything, the latest updated drivers, and just 3D anti-aliasing and like all the cool stuff. You can do that. Because they're super passionate about, and the people that were doing all this stuff, they hadn't even programmed a game before. So the people who are modding and fixing it have the source code, and they're learning how to code with the source code and realizing how horrible the source code is. But yeah, so so the people fixing it are now learning things. Yeah. But it's So anyway, it's got an interesting history.
Certainly has. So on to the final round then, and back to the audience participation part. We had to pick John Romero's top 3 John Romero games from that list of games there.
And the question is, which games did I have the most fun making?
Okay. So based on this, we've discussed some of them already, but Commander Keen obviously we've just recently discussed. But what puts that above some of the others in the list for you?
Well, so Heretic and Hexen, I didn't make the game myself on location. It was a remote creation, right? So that's less fun than actually making the game yourself, where you're drawing the levels, you're writing the tools, you're coding the stuff. I did assign the music and things like that, but it wasn't as hands-on as the other games. So those aren't going to be up on there. Dangerous Dave was I mean, it was by myself, and that's not as much fun as working with a team. So, and that game took 1 month to make that one, because we had a time limit. John and I both had to make one game in 1 month, so we had to make 2 games basically in 1 month to get it out. So he made Catacomb, I made Dangerous Dave, and we got it out there, and then we started working on Slordax. So that was just one person, so that was not as much fun. This was a fun game, but like Wolfenstein was a team. It was the first like real shooter. That was really cool to make. But number 2 is Gunman Taco Truck, which which is a game that we published last year. And the reason why it was so fun is because it's like a family game. Our son, who's 9 years old, came up with the idea because he's got game loops in his head. He plays games all the time, so he understands game loops. And he came up with this crazy game loop idea, which was you're the last Mexican in the U.S., and you have a taco truck, and the U.S. has been nuked basically by 5 atomic bombs. Scientists accidentally set it off, and now everything is mutated. And what you need to do is you want to be successful and sell tacos, but you need to actually get to Canada where there's no competition and everything's not mutated. So you got to make your way from San Diego in a taco truck that's got weapons on it, and you got to blow away everything on the street and get yourself up to Winnipeg, because winners live in Winnipeg, right? So and what you do is you're shooting everything you're avoiding stuff. You're shooting all these mutated things on the street, and when you shoot them, it's like ridiculous fishing. You blast them, and their meat floats in the air, and you have to click it to get it. And you need to get all that meat because you're making tacos out of what you're shooting. So you make these bizarro tacos in the town that you pull into, and there's just the survivors waiting, and they're all cheering when you finally pull in, so you have this gameplay, which is a side-scrolling shooter, death truck basically, that you're upgrading all the weapons on it in like armor and spikes and flamethrowers and rockets and everything. It's got a ton of mods to it, and you can have all of it at the same time. Anyway, you basically pull into town and you're selling tacos to these people, and what they do is now you're inside the taco truck, and now it's kind of like Cooking Mama, where somebody comes up and they say what they want, and you got to hurry up and memorize the recipes and hurry up and put together the tacos and feed it to them, and then they pay you money. And the faster you are, the more money you get. And so you have money, and now you can go buy condiments to make more tacos, but also you have to buy gas. Right. So you have to buy gas for your truck. And also when you're on the highway, there's all the scraps of metal everywhere. There's signs, highway signs. You blow them away and take the metal out of them and stuff. And that scrap metal is what you use to get upgrades or new trucks. Right. So you can either buy a whole new truck, all your upgrades move to the new truck that you've been putting on, and so you just kind of ramp up through. And the trucks have a weapon on them, so that new truck is that weapon as well. Right. So you have to. If you don't upgrade your truck, you're dead. And so when you are leaving a town, you look at the world map and you see the connections to the different towns, and it's different every game. The connections it's like FTL. You don't know where it's going to go. They all end up in Winnipeg somehow, but you might run into a dead end or a loop or something and have to come back, and it's really dangerous to come back. So it's just this crazy, like it's in that is its own game. Looking at the world map is its own very difficult game to strategize on, because the amount of gas you have is limited, and what is in the town is either a garage or it's a shop with condiments, and whatever you need you're going to go towards, but it might not be the best path. So it's a bunch of strategy in 3 different games, not counting just the shopping itself for items. So it's got a lot of really cool stuff in it, and it was really fun because our oldest son Michael was programming on the game, Donovan was designing, and Brenda was doing game design, and then our daughters were testing the game. So everybody was involved, basically making it, and because of that, Donovan was learning how to code, and that was kind of how the game started, was from doing coding lessons with Donovan. And because we were doing that, it led to a Wall Street Journal piece. So the Wall Street Journal came out, and they did articles. VentureBeat did articles. So Donovan's got his pictures
Right.
in the Wall Street Journal, and then Cartoon Network heard about it, and they wanted to just buy the whole IP because the name Gunman Taco Truck would be a great cartoon. So they wanted the whole thing, and we're like, no, we're not going to do that. Let's just do a game publishing deal. So we did that, but it took so long that we in their slate was full, so we just said we'll just self-publish it. So we self-publish it, and then Apple basically chooses it as games that we love this week. They did that on iOS. Then when we put it on the Mac desktop, they chose it for that. And then later on in the year, they wrote a big article about Donovan and the development of the game that went into their new App Store layout. So you can basically go back and read the big Donovan story. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it sounds it, yeah. And finally, there could only really be one, couldn't there?
Yeah, Doom was really fun to make.
You wanted to talk about Doom 2 in particular.
Doom 2. Well, it was better. The funny thing is, like, it's hard to beat like the first game, right? So to make Doom 2 and not be a lame sequel, the idea was don't take away things from Doom. Doom was great, so to make Doom 2, we need to just kind of add to it and make it better. So one of the great things about the Doom weapon design was that no weapon negated any other weapon. That was like one of the design rules, was when we put something in, that doesn't make you not want to use a weapon like it previously. So in the chain gun, when you get the chain gun, that doesn't mean that you don't want to use a pistol, because this thing eats ammo, and it's less precise than a pistol shot. So like every weapon is well balanced, and you never want to get rid of any of them. And then with Doom 2, it was like, well, don't get rid of anything. Let's just add one, and what would be the best thing that we could add? Well, we love the shotgun, and a double barrel would be double fun, basically. We called it the super shotgun originally. So it had to have an even better sound. It had to do massive damage, but you had to be close up and not negate the original shotgun, which is excellent for pretty far distance. So they didn't negate each other, which is great. And then when we were thinking about the design of the rest of the game, we were better at making levels. We love the monsters that were in the game. Let's just add more. Don't get rid of any of them. Just make more of them and that do different things that we can use in special situations. Like, you're not going to have a level full of arch vials because they're awful, and they're really bad, and you would never win a level full of arch vials probably. So it's like they're almost like mini bosses within a level without having to specifically be one. So it was just like make it better, don't take anything away, and that's why Doom 2 could be better than, say, Doom 1 if it wasn't for just the impact that Doom 1 had as cementing the first-person shooter in the first place.
Right, so we've got the prize to give away in a second, but we're going to go get some questions from the audience. There's some of the awards that you've won there, and a question about Quake. We've not really discussed Quake yet, but that period wasn't perhaps the best or the easiest for you and your team. Can you talk about the process of Quake and how it affected you and the team that was working with you?
Well, we were, if we would have known that it would take a year to make the engine before we could make a game, we would have done things differently. But we didn't. Like Doom's engine was ready within 2 months to start making the game. So that was like 2 years before we started working on Quake. So we hadn't had to go through a new cycle for 2 years. So from 93 to the beginning of 95, it was Doom and Doom 2 and Hexen and Heretic were being done. So we were just like business as usual. We're just making a game. And when we started working on Quake, we did not know how hard it was going to be to make that engine. That was a very, very hard engine to make because it was full 6 degrees of freedom, perspective correct texture mapping in software. So writing the rasterizers for that was going to be far more complex than doing the Doom one, which had a lot of limitations to make it easy to do that renderer. So because it was true 3D and we had to make it rock solid and not have anything floating, not have any T-junctions or weird visual glitches, to make it feel like a solid engine, took probably 12 rewrites of the renderer. And those rewrites included re-architecturing the data formats and the intermediate buffers that were used before getting stuff to the screen. And it wasn't just John doing it, it was Michael Abrash doing it. So his job was to take the new architecture that John had and to write the assembly language, Intel instructions and the floating point, the FPU instructions, and interleave them so they were going as fast as they could. And Abrash is like just one of the best assembly language programmers in the world. So both of them working like crazy, and then John would be, 1 month John would be there over the weekend re-architecting stuff, and Abrash would come in on Monday, and John's like, came up with a much better way to do the light mapping buffers, the texture refresh cache, and all these other things. And so that meant that all that code is gone that Abrash wrote because the architecture is totally different. And it was just like crazy, crazy work. And the rest of the team is trying to make a game, but we couldn't. And I knew that this tech, I knew when an engine was ready, and I knew the engine wasn't ready. So I was working on other stuff at the time. I had to write the editor, the Quake editor, so the other guys could make levels. And I experimented with 3D level design now, but I didn't spend all my time on it because there was so much going on outside of the Quake development. Because we were a really small company, and so everybody, including the secretary and tech support and everybody, was 13 people, the whole company. 9 of us were making Quake, and the other 4 were the CEO, the secretary, and the 2 tech support guys. And so we were just working like crazy, and there were hint books. There was Doom, there was Doom 2, there was Heretic, there was Hexen, there was pre-setup for Quake. And all of those things, there's incomings from external sources, Prima Publishing and all kinds of places, Brady Books, all that. And somebody had to deal with it. And it had to be someone on the dev team because those answers have to come from someone that knows everything about all of those games. And the CEO couldn't do that. He could do the biz stuff, but not everything else. And so the impact to the rest of the team had to be minimal. So I did a lot of that external stuff. I ran the Hexen team, the Heretic team. And we even started up another game called Strife during Quake. That was another team that had come down that we had to kind of manage those guys. It was a ton of work, a bunch of extra work. So I didn't do really Quake stuff and let the rest of the team start working on level designs, but they had to throw them away constantly because the engine was changing, and now the engine is better and faster, so that level that you made is like stupid looking because it's just too simple. And now the engine is faster, you can make more complex stuff, and our limits kept on changing for how many polygons that you would see on the screen at one time and all that. So that went on until about November, when the engine was basically ready to go. And when the engine was ready for real, it's not going to change the renderer anymore in the architecture, then we can actually start working on the game itself. And during that whole year, we'd already been doing a bunch of Quake-C experiments, like the nail gun was invented during that time. Multiplayer was in from day one, but it had to get, the whole engine was wrapped around multiplayer architecture, and it had to get better and better over time and get some actual 3D models in place of players. The balls that we were using as just temporary stuff. So the team was not ready. They didn't think that they would be throwing away data for almost a year. And if we knew that was going to happen, we would have made an engine team and we would have made a game team, and we still would have been using probably Hexen tech because it was more advanced than the Doom 2 tech. We probably would have been doing that while they made the engine, and when the engine was ready, then this team finishes the game and starts working with the new engine. That would have been the best way to do it, but we didn't. We didn't know that this was going to happen. And at any time, it could have been done, but it wasn't. So after November, the team was basically destroyed, like mentally destroyed from throwing away all of their work and trying to keep stuff that was good but try and figure out what we're going to make now, because the design went through multiple stages of what we could do. And then when we had a big meeting in November, people were just like, the new people in the company had never been through a new game cycle. They didn't know what it was like to do R&D. They always had like an engine that they could just make levels with. So they were burnt out because they didn't know that this is hard work. R&D is hard work. So, but we kind of had everybody give an equal voice to what they thought we should do. So when we had a big meeting, it was like, are we going to innovate in game design? Or are we going to basically fall back and do the same FPS stuff that we've been doing? and half the people wanted to just slap Doom weapons in and just finish the game. And then I wanted to innovate, and Carmack was on the fence about, yes, I know we should be doing that, but everyone's broken. It's gonna be hard to do that with this team. So we decided let's just make a standard FPS with the tech that we have, with a totally different H.P. Lovecraft influenced design and all that. So it's not Doom, it's different, but it's not something totally new that we actually don't even know what it is yet.
Yeah.
You know, like that whole, like now let's R&D a new design. So to save the team, I guess we just decided let's just do this. And at that point, I basically decided that I'm going to leave after Quake because I think it's important to keep trying to innovate and design. And I mean, the tech was amazing.
Yeah.
But I wanted to do something else. But Quake turned out, I mean, we poured everything into it. And this was the first time that the company did a crunch mode, and it was 7 months, 7 days a week, from November until June, and we were there all the time working on the game. And sometimes it would be, nonstop. So it was like 7 days a week, 12 hours at least, per day. And then when we got to our beta, it was 38 straight hours to get that beta done and out there. And we never worked like that. The team was already burnt out when we started. Started the crunch, they were already burnt out, but now they could see that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. What is the tunnel? So the tunnel got defined, and now let's get to the end of the tunnel. Do as good as do the best job we can while building this game. And that's why they're there. They're not there to like make something crappy and put it in. They always made the best thing they could, and then get to the end, and then we're shipped it. By the time that we had finished this game, it was so hard on the team that American McGee, who was one of the level designers, he was gone. Like he didn't come to work for over a month before the game. So we had to pick up all of his work and try and finish it. And then by the time when the game was finished, I was the only one to upload it because no one was even going to come in to upload the game to the internet.
Yeah.
So I came in on a Saturday and I got the whole thing together, and it took a long time because I was using a different compression program that had no documentation. But I finally got it together and was on IRC telling everybody it's going to happen, at 5:30, and put it up there. And I called a friend over who was a hardcore Doom player. And I was like, hey, do you want to be here when I upload the game? So he came over. He was there. He was one of the Q-Test guys when we put the Q-Test version out in February. So he came over and we just deathmatched and stuff after putting the game up. But it was like, yeah, it's really sad what happened to the whole company after getting this game done. So after basically by the end of I left in August of 96, and by the beginning of 97, half the company was gone. They just left. Yeah. It was just mentally destructive.
If you have a question, if you raise your hands, there is a microphone that will make its way around to you, but if you want to raise your hands just while they're doing that, your name is kind of most commonly associated with John Carmack, but it seems from reading up in the book and what have you, you did far more with Tom Hole than you did with Carmack. So can you tell us about, because it seems everywhere you went, Tom Hole followed soon after. Can you tell us about Tom and working with Tom?
Tom's awesome. Tom is like the most creative designer. The stuff just like flows out of him without even, he doesn't even have to think, and he just makes stuff. It's just really easy to him. And so he's, and Sandy Peterson too, he's a really great designer in a different way. But he can also just like invent stuff constantly. So people who are designers in the industry typically can just come up with stuff like nonstop. Brenda can come up with like a million things immediately. So Tom was the first person I'd ever met that could do that, and that was really amazing. That like he can just go nuts and just invent entire games in 5 minutes. We know what we're doing for 2 months because he spent 5 minutes coming up with something. Yeah. It's awesome, and so when he puts his mind to it and spends more time trying to come up with brand new things, that happens too, and that's like, it's great. He's hilarious. Tom is super funny. He is super easy to get along with. He's the nicest guy. and we just got along really, really well. Even though we were really different, we were raised very differently. We just got along really well because we both like funny stuff, and we grew up back, around the same time period, so we had a lot in common. And he was also not just, he was our creative director, but he was an assembly language programmer for years. Like, I mean, he made those games because he could code. He coded in BASIC, then he switched to assembly. He made a bunch of assembly language games. So he could speak with the rest of us like no problem. And then we decided when, John Carmack is an assembly language programmer in C and everything, and same with me and same with Tom. When we're starting to make a game together, we can't all just be coders. Someone's got to make levels. Somebody has to design stuff. Somebody has to make all these things. And then we basically decided how we're going to divide each of us up. And John said that he wanted to learn how to do graphics better and architecture. He was interested in architecture, so that's what he ended up doing. And I said, I'll do all the rest of the stuff. And Tom loves making levels and game designs and all that, so that was his job. And that's basically what we did. And Tom and I just got along all the time, really, really well.
Good stuff. Did you think of one thing about Doom you haven't told anyone before?
Let's see. Brenda came up with this one. My mom deathmatched in Doom for the first time just 2 years ago. Not that you would think that your parents would ever deathmatch in a game, but she had never played Doom before. So she deathmatched for the first time, and it was pretty funny. And she didn't know that that Doom was that big of a game. She didn't know really how big it was until the Smithsonian inducted Doom into its Hall of Fame. And then she's like, oh my, wow, the Smithsonian. And then she came to GDC to see me talk, and then she saw that people knew who I was at GDC. So she thought that I actually did something.
Maybe you did have a real job.
Yeah, so that was pretty cool.
Maybe you got a real job after all.
Yeah, I got a real job.
Yeah. Obviously, I want to thank John immensely, particularly for the... Thank you, John.
All right.